Hello and welcome from the First United Methodist Church in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. This is the week of Vacation Bible School, and God sent us a rainbow. That's the only announcement I have for this week, so join us as we worship. These words come from the 22nd chapter of Genesis. After these things, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham," and he said, "Here I am." He said, "Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I shall show you." So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took two of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. He cut the wood for the burnt offering, and set out and went to the place in the distance that God had shown him. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place far away. Then Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. So the two of them walked on together. Isaac said to his father Abraham, "Father," and he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "The fire and the wood are here, but where's the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God himself will provide the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." So the two of them walked on together. When they came to the place that God had shown him, Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to kill his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide," as it is said to this day, "On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided." By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to set out for a place that he was to receive as an inheritance, and he set out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he stayed for a time in the land he had been promised, as in a foreign land, living in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked forward to a city that has its foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith, he received power of procreation, even though he was too old, and Sarah herself was barren, because he'd considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from this one person, and him as good as dead, descendants were born as many as the stars of heaven and as the innumerable grains of sand on the seashore. All these died in faith without having received the promises, but from a distance they saw and greeted them. They confessed that they were strangers and foreigners on the earth. For people who speak in this way make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they'd been thinking of the land that they left behind, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God. Indeed, he has prepared a city for them. Those words are from the 11th chapter of the book of Hebrews, and they crystallize what was at stake when God tested Abraham with that command to sacrifice Isaac. Hoping against hope, Abraham and Sarah had trusted God for their future, and God had been faithful to keep his promises. But now would Abraham keep on trusting God, even if God asked them to give Isaac back? Is what goes on between God and Abraham, and for that matter, between us and God, going to be one of those one time, you do this for me, I do this for you kind of arrangements? Or would it be for them, and is it for us? More than that, a continuing and a consistent relationship where a lot of different things go on, but above all, a relationship of trust. Trust that goes two ways. Can we trust God? And can God trust us? The book of Job presents the same kind of situation. It isn't only in Abraham, it's in other places in the Bible, and it's in many parts of our lives. Job, for instance, at the start of the book, has absolutely everything going for him. He's got a great family, he's got his health, he has his flocks and his herds and his camels, everything. I was going to say he has his ducks in a row, but he has his camels in a row instead. And Job, like Abraham, is living an upright kind of a life. And that's when the accuser goes to God and says, "You've blessed the work of his hands, and possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand now and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." And the rest of that book tells how that goes. Go ahead and read it. Read it for yourself. That's what I'm hoping all of this does. Get you to read it for yourselves. Get you to live it and discover it and feel it for yourself. I hope you do. Because this business of whether and how we relate to God, that is a conundrum that all of God's people face. And not only when things are going wrong, but also when things are going well. Will we trust God only when we can see the outcome? Or will we trust God only when we need help? Or will we trust God in the present and also trust God for the future, even when it may mean some kind of loss for us in the present? Not just something that happens to us, but something that comes about because of our own choices. Our choice to follow, our choice to trust. It's one of those things that we have to deal with. Because it's one thing to have faith, and it's one step further than that to be faithful. Since this is the weekend of the 4th of July, I'm going to use an example right now that I know is political. I say it's political, but it's not partisan. There's a difference there. One unifying characteristic that pretty much everybody who's going to watch this, or everybody who's going to hear it in church, shares, is that at some point or another, someone in their family, maybe a generation back, maybe several generations back, but also in a couple cases, they themselves have been in a position that they left their homeland and they went to another country. Generally, and the people I'm talking to, this country. And America is not the promised land that Abraham was looking for. But some people have seen it as if it were, and have had that experience of saying, I'm going to leave where I am and go and travel elsewhere because things have got to be a little bit better. Or maybe it's just simply that there's some opportunity, but they're going to go. And going to another country, or I'll say coming to this one, was an act of faith for some people and an act of desperation for other people. And lest we limit ourselves, we shouldn't either forget the millions of people who came here against their will, who were kidnapped, enslaved, and brought here in chains. All of those people ended up here. And for all of them, what followed, however it began, was I said all, but almost all. There were rare exceptions, but for almost all, what followed was a story of hardship and a story of poverty that may have gone on for generations. In some cases, may still be going on. And eventually, for most, not for all, but for most, or for many, they found a place. And what helped them through their struggles and helped them find a place would be faith in God and trust that God would bring them through the horrible stuff and bring them to something much better. And God has been with many people all the way along. And now things might be looking up a bit. I'm not saying things are perfect by any means. But the challenges people face may not be as desperate, at least for them. What about the people that are still facing those? What about the folks that are still struggling and having those same thoughts that say, if I could get somewhere, if I could be in a place that's safe, if I could raise my children without worrying quite so much, if I were in a place of law and order. If I were in a place where there were jobs, if I were in a place where I could speak my mind, where I could worship freely, would I not then be better? And those people often are simply repeating what others have gone through. And they're trying to achieve these things with faith that God will help them, with God wanting the best for them. And it leads them to take some horrible, dangerous risks. But they go. And from this side, what happens? What about the people whose faith is now called to be faithfulness? Do they or do they not? Do we or do we not? Hold on to the vision that God, who has provided for us, will continue to provide for us, but for them as well. Do we not have a vision of hospitality, of welcome? Or do we have this idea that if somebody is coming from somewhere else, it's going to take away things from us? But what if it does? What if it does? Is it not worth sharing? I mean, where is the vision of welcome? Oh, sure. There's a vision of welcome for the engineer, for the doctor, for the actuary, for the data analyst, for the people that have the qualifications and are going to add value to society as a whole, assuming they speak English already. But on the other hand, where on this side of things is the faithfulness, the spirit that once looked further down the road and said, God will help us all. God will bring it to conclusion where there is plenty. And even when there's not plenty, there's always enough. So give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. It may be a sacrifice is involved. But then again, what has God not done for us? To have faith is to know that God will see you through when you are that wretched refuse. To be faithful is to live knowing that God's work that didn't begin with us, but that we benefit from, it doesn't end with us either. And others may benefit whom we don't even know. To be faithful is to trust what God has done, He will continue to do. And to go along with that, despite the temptation to rest easy with what we have been given and simply leave it at that. That does happen, that temptation. It comes to everybody who knows the physical blessings of God, even the least bit of prosperity. And it's a It's a danger. James Weldon Johnson saw the spiritual danger that was faced by those who were seeing the initial gains of their own escape from Jim Crow. And he wrote, God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might brought us to the light. Keep us forever in the path, we pray, lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee. Lest our hearts drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land. God was not looking to Abraham to kill his son heartlessly or to perform some ritualistic echo of a pagan human sacrifice. God was looking to Abraham to see if he would set aside what he had already been given, something so dear that he had waited for and waited for and waited for, something that he had struggled toward, the birth of a son, the promise of a people, the promise of a land all around him, the promise that would be given to his children and their children and their children. Would he set all of that aside if God asked him? Would he trust that God knows what he does when he points us in the direction of something we don't even know? Fully trusting, fully asking us to trust that he understands not just what is good for us, but good for the life of the world. And so there was that moment when Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to kill his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. And he said, do not lay your hand on the child or do anything to him. And at that moment, I have no doubt that Abraham just kind of dropped the knife and collapsed in relief. It would turn out to be God himself, none of us, not Abraham, but God himself, who would allow his son to die for the life of the world. It would be God himself who would take on all of its pain and suffering and loss. But it would be because Abraham and Isaac went through this horrible moment of trauma and went through it faithfully. A trauma so deep that it remained a conscious part of their family history for centuries down to the present. And because that trauma was there, horrible as it is, we could begin to recognize, all of us begin to recognize what was going on later when the Son of God, who had left his home in eternity to wander about our world, came to face down and overcome the violence of death, like Abraham and Isaac, like all of us, except that he took it all the way through. And on the other side of it, received his life back. Because this is a story of faithfulness, a story about the life given back to Isaac because of his father's faithfulness, like life would be given back to Jesus because of his faithfulness to God the Father. And the life that Jesus was given back, he gives back to all of us, each and every one. And it's a story of what we do with the life that we receive from him. Do we live it for ourselves, or do we live it for God? And that's a question you have to answer for yourself, with his help. Amen.